Alright, I'm continuing my series of progressively hotter and hotter takes, and before you write your angry comments, let me explain a bit more, cause I know complaining about tribal decks is gonna ruffle some feathers, especially since the second and third most popular commanders of all time are tribal decks. So just like in previous videos, I'm talking about a specific type of tribal deck, not all tribal decks. I know the title is a bit of clickbait, but what are you gonna do? Sue me? I'm a YouTuber, I clickbait. Also, unlike other decks, like Group Hug and Chaos, I don't mind playing against tribal decks. They don't ruin the dynamic of the game or anything. Now, when I say I don't like tribal decks, I'm talking about the supported tribes. When you go to EDH Rec and sort by types, basically stuff that are in the top row, or maybe the second and third one a little bit as well. Just stuff I've seen so many times before. And I get it, look, I love lizards. You put wings on a lizard and make it breathe fire? Awesome. Super cool, objectively cool. Dragons are awesome. Can't really say the same thing about elves though, like, I have pointy ears in real life, but that's not very exciting. But what I'm saying is I understand why some people are like, oh, I want to fill my deck with a bunch of dragons. My issue with tribal decks that have a lot of support, they are so similar and boring. If I had a nickel for every time someone at my local game store hyped up their super cool, overpowered deck, just for it to be the most boring milquetoast dragon deck that immediately folded to one board wipe, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. And if I expand that to other tribal decks, I would have like 20 nickels. There are so many times where someone is like, this deck is so powerful, it's not for making friends, it's for making enemies. And then they just poop a bunch of creatures onto the board and then lose as soon as I cast a board wipe. It's crazy. And it's the same deck I've seen like 50 times. Okay, let's compare some decks here. I'm just gonna go to EDH Rec and pull up 2 mono green elf decks. I'm just gonna grab the most recent Azuri Renegade Leader deck, that's about $300, and the most recent Eladamri Lord of the Elves deck, that's also around $300. Okay, looking at 2 mono green elf tribal commanders, we can see they have 56 cards shared between the 2 of them, so more than half the deck. Now, 28 if you exclude lands, sure, we'll do that. Now, 28 cards being the same might not seem like a lot, or maybe it does, that's like a third of the deck. I think this partially exemplifies how similar these decks all are. Now let's compare 2 mono green +1/+1 counter decks. Same thing, I'm filtering for the +1/+1 counter theme on EDH Rec, and just grabbing 2 of the most recent decks that are around $300. We'll compare Vorinclex and Kodama, and when we look at these, we see that they share 43 cards, 20 of which being basic lands, which we can ignore. So only 23 cards overlap, less than the 2 mono green tribal commanders. And this honestly makes a lot of sense, because counters have many different ways you can build them. You can go tall and put all your counters on one creature, or you can go wide and put your counters on many creatures. Unlike tribal decks that are almost always go wide, play an anthem, and swing in, especially elves. There's just less flexibility with tribal decks, so you're going to see more overlapping cards. But we can take this one step further. Let's compare the same Azuri list with a Lathril deck. Both elf decks with similar budget, but now there's a color difference. We still see 40 cards that are the same, 27 without lands. Still more similar overlapping cards than the 2 mono green commander decks, but let's take Vorinclex and compare it to another +1/+1 counter commander, a Golgari one like Skullbriar. Again, similar price range, just the most recent one I could find on EDH Rec. We see only 19 cards overlapping and 12 when you remove the basics, which when you think about it makes sense. Normally in Commander, because it's a singleton format and there are so many cards, most decks will look pretty different actually. When you see what cards actually overlap, there's very few, but tribal decks are not like that. They overlap like crazy because they all play the same lords and the same tribal support cards. Even when you splash other colors, your elf ball deck still looks basically the same as everyone else's. Look, maybe I'm just a hipster or whatever you want to call me, because I hate having a deck that's the same as everyone else's. I mean, I take apart any commander deck that falls onto EDH Rec's top 100 most popular commanders. And I actively use EDH Rec to filter for cards to make sure my deck is different than other people's. I know that's a bit extreme compared to most people, but I mean, it's just personally what I think makes Commander the most fun, is having a deck that is genuinely your deck. Also, tribal players who hate tutors. What is your argument for playing a bunch of cards that are basically the same? When I say I like tutors, people rush to the comments to say, oh, tutors suck, they ruin the singleton nature of Commander, but how many 3-mana lords with minor buffs exist, or 2-mana lords with like basically the same buff? I never see anyone who comes out against tutors also come out against tribal decks that basically break the singleton nature by playing essentially the same card like 6 times. I want to finish off this video talking about some tribal decks that I actually like. Something cool and different that I think you can do with tribal, and maybe some ideas for you to hopefully brew around as well. How about this as an idea? Resond and a blue background. And then fill your deck with high toughness crab, like Cherix and Fortress Crab, and have them deal damage equal to their toughness, which is super fun. Like, that's a unique, interesting tribal deck because it's taking the Toughness Matters themes and crossing it over with crabs that usually are like 1/5s and stuff. And crabs are also just cool. I love them. They're delicious friends. Or a buddy of mine plays Kenrith as his Spell Shaper tribal commander. It's full of ways to buff activated abilities and untap creatures. The deck is really different than any other tribal deck I've seen, and it's really fun to see pop off because he's tapping and untapping and discarding all these Spell Shapers to trigger a bunch of effects and do different things. Even with more popular tribes, there are some fun spins you can put on them. I know people that play Scion of the Ur-Dragon and Tiamat instead of the Ur-Dragon, so they can specifically play a more toolbox style of dragon, which is fun. Tutoring for specific dragons with weird effects can lead to some exciting blowouts or just weird plays, instead of just playing a bunch of dragons and turning them sideways without a care in the world. Look, I'm not saying don't play tribal decks. There are cool ways you can build supported tribes, and there are lots of underplayed tribes that you could totally brew around. And I really don't mind playing against tribal decks, mostly because it's really easy for me to beat them since my control decks are full of board wipes and I usually just steamroll over them as soon as they dump their hand. But as long as you're having fun with your tribal deck, whatever, who cares what I think? If you like your big elf ball deck that's playing all the exact same cards as everyone else, that's fine as long as you have fun. I just want to encourage players to try new things, brew unique decks, and make a commander deck of your own. I'm sure I've said a lot of things in this video you probably disagree with, so let me know about them in the comments below. And if you agree with me, let me know the fun twist or weird tribe that you play in your commander deck. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more.